Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, Meet the Elected Official. I am your host, Larry DeMarco, and today we are here with Tim Kearney, Mayor of Swarthmore Borough. Tim has been heavily involved in community issues since moving here 22 years ago. He served on the Planning Commission, SRA Board, coached a wide variety of SRA sports, and through his town-based firm has provided pro bono services for many civic-minded projects throughout Swarthmore. Tim and his wife Claudia run CuetoKEARNEYdesign Architects, specializing in sustainable college, university, and residential work projects in Swarthmore, and he is an adjunct professor of architecture at Drexel University. He is now serving his second term as Swarthmore Mayor. Tim, thank you for being a guest at Delaware County Political News.
Well, thank you for having me, Larry.
Tim, what are the duties of mayor? Is the mayor the township version of the president?
Well, no, not really. In Pennsylvania, we have different kinds of government depending on how the particular town was founded. So that's why we have townships and boroughs. And you may notice that boroughs tend to have mayors and townships have council presidents. So that's where we have a council president as well, but the mayor is more of I very often like it to the vice president in the Senate. In terms of legislative work, the mayor can veto legislation or he can vote to break ties. But that's really the only time he participates actively in the legislative process with a borough. Otherwise, the mayor is kind of almost a figurehead. I kind of think of it as the chief cheerleader. From a technical point of view, the mayor is responsible for the police department and the fire department. So he's the chief public safety officer in the borough, and that's something that I certainly take very seriously.
Tim, what got you interested in running for office and becoming an elected official?
Well, Larry, it was really kind of an organic thing. When we moved to town, we had left Mount Airy in Philadelphia, where we had a very active community there. So one of the reasons we chose Swarthmore to move to is because we were looking for an active community as well as a good school district for our kids. We moved when my oldest was 5 and in kindergarten. And then upon getting here, we learned very quickly that while Swarthmore was great, there were still some good things that needed to be done. And there was active work that really kind of needed to happen in order to get the kind of community that we were interested in. So it was like my grandmother's always told me when I was growing up that if you decide there's something that's worth having, then you know it's worth working hard for. So we did. We jumped right in. We started with pro bono projects because my wife and I are both architects. And we designed and helped build the Sparrow House, which is an outdoor classroom behind the elementary school. And that was literally the year we moved into town. And Sandy Sparrow, who was the school principal at that time, I really credit her with the first time I really kind of understood what it meant to be a public citizen, to be an active citizen within a community to try to accomplish things that you wanted to get done. So we did that. We did the pro bono projects. We started to get involved with various boards, whether it was the SRA board or the pool board, and Claudia was on the zoning hearing board for a stint, and I was on the planning commission for a long time. And when I was on the planning commission, that's when I really started to get much more involved with borough council and how what council's work was about. And then I think it was about 9 years ago when the current mayor had done his 2 terms and was going to be stepping down, I got a phone call from a friend who said, Rick Lowe wants to run for mayor of Swarthmore, but he wants to know whether you're going to run. And I chuckled and said, no, I'm not going to run. In fact, it had never even occurred to me to run. I bring that up only because it was kind of a light bulb moment when sort of you kind of understood, no, people actually can do that. People can be the mayor. People can be active in ways to try to work for the kinds of community that they want to have. And then, so Rick was elected, and then 4 years later, Rick called me up and said, Tim, now it's your turn. You need to step up and do this. And I did, and seeing it much more as a public service than as for any kind of political reasons. I still don't think of myself as a politician. I think of myself as an active citizen, a citizen who's willing to act politically in order to try to accomplish the things that I want to get done.
And you were active even before you moved to the area back in Philadelphia, right, Tim?
When we were in Philadelphia, sure, we were involved in politics as much as we were. I remember working on Allison Schwartz's first campaign when we met her on the train station in Mount Airy on Allen's Lane. But it was more kind of arm's length kind of stuff. We knocked on doors and we voted and we encouraged people to vote, but we weren't in the trenches like we were when we got to like we've become in Swarthmore.
What issues and conflicts have been involved in your role as mayor these past several years?
Well, most things in the borough really tend to relate to town gown issues with the college. The college is kind of like the 600-pound gorilla that sits in the corner and has a big influence on things. So the roundabout was very controversial when that was being planned. I had a lot of people come up to me in the co-op and kind of wag their finger at me and say, "You're going to ruin the town with that monstrosity." And of course, it's turned out to be wonderful. It's worked exactly the way that the experts who designed it and who pushed for it anticipated it would. And it's taken a very dangerous intersection in town and made it pedestrian friendly and made it make sense. It was very difficult to tell people how to get to my office in downtown Swarthmore because it involved a hairpin turn off of Chester Road and through a 5-way intersection that was just plain scary. So the roundabout was a big issue. The inn obviously was an issue. That was actually one of the first things I got involved in 20 years ago. That's when the referendum was passed in Swarthmore that was worded in such a way, he said, if the college builds an inn and if the inn has a restaurant, can that restaurant have a liquor license?
Talk about that for a little bit now. Swarthmore, what is the license or the ordinance that governs Swarthmore right now?
Well, right now, we literally just passed an ordinance in the last election that would allow for liquor sales. So for the first time, we're no longer a dry town. Prior to that, we were a dry town with one special exception for the liquor license at the inn. We have now. It's not necessarily a done deal. Just because we allow liquor licenses doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're having a flood of people coming in to want to sell beer and wine. The main push behind it was really to allow our co-op to sell beer and wine. But going back to our Quaker roots, there's a wrinkle there as well, because of the original deeds that were drawn up by Mr. Biddle, who was a member of the board of the college who actually purchased the land that downtown Swarthmore is on from the college. The college was first. It was farmland, then a railroad, then the college bought 2 of the farms because of the railroad, which is why Parish Hall is oriented directly on the train station. And then the college actually sold to one of their overseers, Mr. Biddle, the property that was then laid out to become downtown Swarthmore. And Mr. Biddle, being a good Quaker, wrote in a deed restriction about the sale of spirits on those particular properties. So right now the co-op is going through a very long process to figure out how to get permission to override the restriction that's on their deed.
So Swarthmore has been a dry town for over a century or so.
Well, over 125 years, yeah.
Sure. And then the first loosening of that ordinance was allowing the inn to sell beer or wine. Now you just passed an ordinance allowing the co-op, which is a supermarket in town.
In downtown Swarthmore.
In downtown Swarthmore.
Third oldest co-op in the country.
Which now is permitted or can file a few more papers to then sell wine and beer, I suppose.
That's the idea.
Is there any prohibition to a liquor store coming to Swarthmore if they applied for a license?
No, there's no prohibition to it. The way that the liquor laws work, we're allowed 2 liquor licenses by right, so that 2 more liquor licenses can come into the borough. Any liquor license beyond that would have to be approved by Borough Council, which is why, for example, Media, Pennsylvania, which is roughly the same size as Swarthmore in terms of its inhabitants, people who live there, they have I don't know, 14 or 15 liquor licenses in that town, even though they're only allowed 2 by right, because their borough council approves them when they come up for when they apply.
So Tim, can the inn get sell hard alcohol if they did the necessary applications and permits?
Well, the inn does. I mean, they don't just sell beer and wine in their bar, but they don't package store it. They don't sell, over the counter kind of thing. But there's no prohibition necessarily against that. The biggest thing we have in Swarthmore, the biggest control we have is the actual infrastructure of the town. We don't have very many large storefronts or large kind of areas that would sort of make sense from a business point of view for someone to come in and run a big, we're not going to get a Hooters, I don't think, in Swarthmore. We're more likely to get a nice restaurant that wants to have a liquor license. That's what we hope for.
What other issues have you been dealing with Swarthmore since you were elected?
Well, I think as I said before, the biggest thing was the kind of town gown stuff, and then we have a pretty wonderful relationship with the college. We meet once a month with senior people at the college, and we sit down and discuss whatever issues there are that are going on. There's an instinct on people to think about the relationship with the colleges and us versus them, but that's really not the case. I would say that 90% of the things that the borough wants, the college also wants, and what's good for the college is definitely good for the borough, and what's good for the borough is good for the college. So it's very little, we have very few areas where we're in conflict with them. As you might imagine, the biggest ones become at that intersection, the border between where the college starts and stops and where the town starts and stops.
This harmony is somewhat unusual for a small town, isn't it?
I think it is. Part of it is just the nature of the college, because they have very few people who live off campus. 95% of the students who go to school at Swarthmore, it's only a college, it's only undergraduate, live on campus. And that's actually a great thing for us too, because the newest dormitories that they built have kitchens in them, which means that we have that many more students who are shopping in our co-op for their food. I mean, in this past year, the college implemented what they call their one-card system, which is like most other colleges, where you have your ID card gets access into buildings. In this case, it also allows you to buy coffee at Hobbs, or shop for groceries at the co-op, or have lunch at Occasionally Yours, or any of the other number of places that we have in town that accept that one card. So that's been a great thing for our town center area.
Tim, discuss the Headstrong House. What happened with that issue, and how was it resolved?
So the Headstrong House, there's was originally a single-family house, but it's done a lot of things over the years, on a busy corner, Chester Road and Harvard Avenue. And the house was on the market for a long time. And Headstrong is an organization that was based in Ridley Park, or Ridley Township. And they saw the house, they were looking to expand their services. What Headstrong is an organization that provides housing for cancer patients and their caregivers. Philadelphia is one of, I think, 5 or 6 places across the country that have a very particular kind of treatment that they offer. So they get a lot of people who travel in to go to CHOP or HUP for this procedure. So the Swarthmore location made a lot of sense to them because of the train, a great train access into the city. So Headstrong wanted to buy it and came to the borough and said, this is what we want to do. We want to house 5 or 7 cancer patients and their caregivers in the house, and we need a special exception from the borough's zoning code in order to allow that to happen. So we had 3 separate hearings with a special commission that was mostly the planning commission, but some other people added to it as well, that heard their appeal and granted the special exception to allow more than 3 unrelated people to occupy a house of a particular kind. There were a small neighbor group that was adamantly opposed to it. They thought it was kind of ruining their neighborhood, and they appealed it. The decision then went to Borough Council on appeal, and there were again 3 hearings with council. The council unanimously approved it. The neighbors still weren't happy, still were not pleased.
Can I ask about that? What was the reasoning why that would hurt the neighborhood in any way, a cancer rehabilitation center of some sort like that?
Well, it's hard for me to speak for them specifically as to what their major, what I heard in the hearings, of course, was that they thought that it was just a different kind of use than what would normally happen in a single family house neighborhood. And that their neighborhood, that they thought it was going to be detrimental to the way that they were raising their kids, or there was some concern about property values, there was concern about a lot of other things.
Well, we're not talking about heroin addicts, right? We're not talking about a halfway house where
No.
people were coming out of prison are living, correct?
No, and it's not, the whole thing was happening in another Providence at the similar times, with the house over on Providence Road, which was being used as a drug rehabilitation place, which is a different kind of issue. This is a much, and
More benign, if you will.
it's more benign and quiet, certainly quieter. I think that, these people, when they come and stay with the Headstrong people, and the new people, their first people are supposed to come in a couple of weeks, they are, they're there for treatment. It's not like, but it's very difficult to try to understand, to get behind people's fears, because it was, the neighbors, I respect what they were saying, but it was basically a fear-based thing. They were worried about what could possibly happen.
So it's still a public use, that's the idea, I suppose.
It's a public use, and I think that very often what I talk about a lot when I talk in my role as mayor is this idea of building community. And community is a messy thing. It involves, it's all kind of about vitality, and vitality comes from not a whole lot of the same thing as much as it does from variety of things. So we're constantly trying to create events where it's multi-generational, where we don't just have, Swarthmore is like any other suburban place where I think you tend to know your friends based around your kids. Your kids kind of dictate your social circle in a lot of ways, because you spend a lot of time with those people, whether it's at PTA meetings, or whether it's at back to school nights, or it's at the soccer games, or town soccer, or whatever, and those things kind of happen. So anything we can do that kind of messes that up a little bit and gets different people in different areas of the town and different kind of levels of both an age and socioeconomic things, if it gets them to mix, that's when real kind of community comes out. And I think within a community, a place like Headstrong is a welcome addition, because it's a way that we as a borough can really show our quality in terms of how we deal with these short-term guests who are coming in and staying in our borough.
So you mentioned that a judgment was rendered, people were not happy with that. How did this all work out?
Well, they appealed it to I think it was the Court of Common Pleas. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure if I have my courts exactly right, but that was heard by a judge. There were hearings, and that judge ruled in favor of that council acted properly. And my understanding is that they're going to appeal that one again. So that's all happening, but while that's happening, Headstrong has renovated the house completely. They had their official ribbon cutting right before the holidays, and they're, as I said before, they're looking to have their first cancer patients move in the next couple of weeks. So they've gotten permission to move forward because of the nature of the way the appeals were heard and everything else, and they've moved forward. And we're very confident that there's that we're on good legal ground in terms of because essentially it's the neighbors now, by continuing to appeal, it's essentially like suing the borough kind of thing, because they were unhappy with the borough's decision. It kind of has nothing really specifically to do with Headstrong. It has to do with the way that the borough,
Rendered its decision. You just wrote a State of the Borough address rather recently, maybe a week or so ago. What is the state of the borough?
So the state of the borough is strong. We are, our financial house is in good order. We have strong leadership through our finance chair, Michael Carey, and through our borough manager, Jane Billings, both wonderfully experienced people. We're not raising taxes. This is now, I think, the 5th year in a row that that our borough taxes aren't raising. We have no control over the school district taxes. But one change that we made this year is that we're letting people know how much of their tax dollar actually goes to fund the fire department. The fire department is a long-term issue that we're going to have. Not just Swarthmore, I think every place in Delaware County is going to have the same issues going forward. We've always relied on volunteers for the fire department. Their volunteers are becoming much scarcer. The amount of training required for those volunteers has become much more onerous. And we and a lot of other people are looking more towards professional firefighters. So we have the equivalent of 4 full-time right now, and we're looking to expand that in the future in order to maintain the level of service that people in the borough are used to and that they expect. Now, just because they understand how much of their taxes are paying doesn't mean they should ignore the request for money that the fire department makes from time to time, because they're still responsible for raising some of their own money besides what the borough provides for them. Other things in the state of the borough, we're looking back at 2017. I talk about the Headstrong House opening up and what a good thing that is going to be for the borough moving forward. We talk about some wonderful people who passed away. Sandy Sparrow, who I mentioned earlier, passed away this year, and she'll be sorely missed. We had David Grove ended his 20-year career of public service in the borough when his term was up as borough council president. So I talk a little bit about David as well. And then we're just looking towards the future and trying to figure out what's going to come next. And we have 3 key intersections in town which will finally be getting more pedestrian friendly when those improvements get done. And we've been working on that for 3 or 4 or 5 years now through the various task forces that we've had, pedestrian and bicycle task force. Also, we're continuing to implement the aging in place task force recommendations, which, again, this idea that community is more than just a lot of the same sort of people. We're looking for ways to try to allow our older residents to stay in town and to continue to be part of our community. Normally what happens is that people want to give up the big house and where they raise their families, and they're still paying a lot of taxes on that for the school taxes in particular. But so the whole idea of this task force was to reinforce the fact that we think our older folks are viable parts of and really important aspects of our community, and try to figure out ways that they feel comfortable staying.
Tim, you are running for office for the Senate this coming cycle. How did that come about?
Well, I think, Larry, much like the mayor's job, it was kind of an organic thing. Things keep building kind of one on top of another. I'm very happy in my career as an architect. Adjunct professor at Drexel, they keep me very busy. But I think a combination of sort of a bit of outrage about the way national politics came about last year, the 2016 election, and then through our current state rep, Leanne Kruger-Brannicky, I got to spend some time in Harrisburg and really kind of see how things were happening there. So when Leanne came to talk to me last spring and she suggested that I should really think seriously about the state Senate, I said, well, maybe this is something we really need to think about. We are in a position, I keep saying we because I couldn't do what I do without my wife and partner, Claudia. She's not only my life partner, she's my business partner. And we kind of do everything together, and I would not be or even thinking about this if I didn't have her full support and her expertise and talents behind this whole run. So when Leanne talked to me about that, we really decided that, no, this is something we could step up and we really could do this. Another one of those kind of light bulb things like the mayor's job, where it never even occurred to me that state Senate was a possibility. But the more I understood, it is a possibility, and it's something that's worth working for. It's a chance to continue to make a difference on a larger scale and really try to help people not just in Delaware County, but in the whole Commonwealth.
Why should people vote for you, Tim?
Well, I think that my life experiences have led me to this point. I didn't wake up one morning and decide I wanted to be a professional politician in state government. It was an incremental thing. It's an organic kind of development, the way it occurs. As an architect, I'm used to thinking about things in a different way than, say, most lawyers typically are. Architects are used to very complex situations that just getting a building built is not an easy thing. It's a very complicated process that involves understanding what the goal is, where you're trying to get to, and then understanding the best way to kind of assemble the people who can help you get there. Architects they're not typically the smartest guy in the room, but they're the guy who really kind of understands who to talk to and who to bring in, what experts, whether it's consultants, it's engineers, or it's dealing with contractors or dealing with owners to try to get the whole picture, whether it's the financial aspect of the building or whether it's the technical things required to get it built or the political approvals that need to go. So in some ways it's like lawmaking in the legislature. It's about making sausage is never pretty, but it's a process. And I think what I basically am bringing to the state senate race is this experience about how to actually get things done, actually get things accomplished, and to move the ball along and keep moving things and to get them to a point where they actually happen. I have 30 or 40 buildings that I can go point to around Delaware County and around the country and say this happened because of my leadership. And it's not so much that we drew the pictures and figured out what the colors were and that kind of things, but it's the leadership that was required to really keep things moving, keep things on track, make things happen on budget, and make things happen that were created a better world for the people who either occupy or even go by these buildings.
Tim, we're going to leave it there, and I want to thank you for being a guest on Delaware County Political News.
Thank you, Larry.
We have been here with Tim Kearney, Mayor of Swarthmore, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe, and forward this link to all the contacts on your contact list and Facebook friends. We're signing off. Tune in next time. Bye for now.